Jazzcast Pros.
Hello there, my graceful grinders and totally uniquers. This is Dr. Pamela Brown-Grinion, and welcome to another episode of the Grace and Grind podcast, where we celebrate stories of strength, transformation, and purpose. And today, we're going to be honoring the journey of a woman who has walked through the fire of adversity and emerged not just unscathed, but refined, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Today, we're going to be talking with Ms. Toi Sweeney, author of Secrets of a Well-Dressed Brand, a TEDx speaker, and founder and CEO of the Well-Dressed Brand. Toi, I'm so happy that we are able to talk today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I am doing great. How are you? Thank you for everything.
Yes, I'm fantastic. It's been a crazy day, but hey, I'm fantastic on purpose.
I love it. I love it.
So we're going to hear a little bit about Toi's story, how she handled her grind so gracefully, and we know that it is going to be most beneficial to you. So Toi, I just want to jump right in. Tell us a little bit about the defining moment or experience in your life that forced you to pause and say, hey, something is going on here and I got to do something differently.
Oh, well, there has been so many, but I had the pleasure of starting my company about 8 years ago. Prior to that, I was a style director at the world's largest home shopping network, QVC. And I was there for 16 years where I got to support all 30 program hosts, creating on-air looks for them, really lean into their personal brand through wardrobe and making sure that those looks impacted the bottom line of a multi-billion-dollar company, of course, right? But through that and something that large at that scale, we're talking about live TV. You're on all the time. There are no off days. It's like working at Disneyland. It's 24 hours a day. I even throughout my career there worked 80 hours a week with the newborn. I remember, just crying to my husband because I was so tired.
I know you had to be.
All that time, but it was, it was worth it. And so I left there, like I said, 7-8 years ago and launched the Well-Dressed Brand, wrote a best-selling book, as you mentioned in my intro, Secrets of a Well-Dressed Brand. And from that, I have been featured on Forbes.com, BBCnews.com. I've been on, over 30 podcasts. I've been featured in Wear Women's Work magazine. I have been featured in True Eye magazine. Yeah, and I just really focus on personal branding from a narrative, controlling the narrative perspective.
I love the resume. Absolutely impressive. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. And it was important to me. And I say all that to say, because, I love how you were kind of painting this picture of grace under fire. And I think that if you would have asked me during that time if I was doing it gracefully, probably I would have said no. You can't see it when you're in it, right? A diamond doesn't look around as it's being formed and cut and say, look at my facets, right?
Right.
And so I definitely wouldn't have said that, but there was definitely a time in my career where I felt stuck. And I really cut my teeth on the Well-Dressed Brand. While at QVC, prior to that, I worked for companies like Ralph Lauren, Crabtree and Evelyn, White House Black Market. I ran a $15 million sales business for Bloomingdale's in New York City. And so when I got to QVC, it was my dream, and that was why I stayed so long. And it was just the most magical experience. But there is a lot, as you know, if you're working with anyone in any company for that long, those people become your work family. But even through that, you're still, as a Black woman, dealing with, all the things that we have to deal with, being misunderstood, sometimes having a toxic leader, being overlooked. So I was faced in this point in my career where I had no upward mobility. There was nowhere for me to go. There was no role that, that could be created that I could see and nowhere out. And that was kind of really how I started to get my understanding of personal branding at a time when nobody was really talking about it. And so I was put on these 2 large projects at work, and I really started to test out my theories. And all those theories are the ones that I dumped into the book. But even going back further to that, I think it was like 1998, right? When the market crashed, I had a couture level design business that featured evening gowns and bridal gowns. And my down went with the economy went my business. So as we started to climb through that, work through that, I graduated with my fashion design degree, had my fashion marketing business degree already. And I wanted to start a family. I was ready. My husband had been traveling for about 8 years. He was like head of security for, different rock bands. And, we were living a life, and I really wanted to start a family. And so like most of us, I have the talk and I'm like, I need you to come home because I can't do that by myself. Was, of course, then faced with a lot of fertility issues.
So life was lifing, to say the least. Life was lifing.
Life was lifing. And, there was trouble in our marriage. There was an adjustment from him coming home, being able to flying on private jets and, going from country to country with all these rock bands. And then he has to come home and there's just me. There's no glitz. There's no glamour. There's no, so we were dealing with that adjustment as well. And then just the hard news that my tubes were blocked and that we weren't going to be able to have a child. So, we were so excited to start our in vitro journey. We finally get pregnant. I'm planning my baby shower. I'm at work with all of my friends and everybody is planning their family and having their, all pregnant at the same time, having a wonderful time. And then about 6 months into our pregnancy journey, I had a uterine eruption. Got rushed to the hospital that night. My husband tells me that I passed out, that I had a seizure. I don't recall any of it at all. I just remember the ambulance carrying me down the stairs and asking me if I knew my name, and I remember hearing him tell them that I was pregnant. And so we arrive at the hospital. They're checking everything. Doctor comes in and says that there's been a fetal demise and that I needed to get rushed into surgery immediately because I was bleeding internally. And I don't think that it was until I was out of surgery that I could fully grasp what happened. And as I talked to the surgeon, she tells me, the moment that I cut you, you started bleeding out on the table. She had to remove my son Miles from my body and then proceed to save my life. So 8 days later in the hospital, 2 blood transfusions later, my husband, we lost our son. He almost lost me. And, then you get out and, you have to plan a funeral.
Yeah.
Because of how far along I was. And there's so many things about that moment in my life that I just really don't remember.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that there was a lot of emotional pain that you had to deal with while going through that whole experience.
For years to come. And I mean, because of insurance reasons, one of the things was that they had to keep me on the maternity floor. So there I am on the maternity floor and I don't have a baby. Mm-hmm. And so every night for years, when I would go home and I would fall into a REM sleep, I would hear babies crying because that just it's something that it just cemented into my brain, during that time. And, it was sad because I would turn over to our husband. We're in this huge empty house and there's no baby. Right. And just like, hey, do you hear a baby crying? And he's like, no.
Yeah.
There's no
baby.
I
was going to ask you, how did that emotional pain manifest, in your life while you're going through this? And I couldn't even imagine.
The first 5 of the 8 days that I was in the hospital, I didn't cry. They made me hold my son and I didn't understand why they would do that. It later turned out to be a blessing, but in the moment, I think that I should have been thinking, this is so wonderful and look how beautiful he is. But if I'm being honest, I was just thinking like I'm holding a dead baby.
Yeah.
Because I was just so numb to it that I couldn't cherish the moment. Mm-hmm. I was grateful that they took Polaroid pictures of him, but I also didn't understand that in the moment because I was like, why would I want them? But of course now I can look at them and just, I hold him to my chest and I just, because I just couldn't wrap my head around it in the moment. So there was a good 5 days. And I remember, On the fifth day, I woke up and I looked at my husband and I said, can you go get my mom? And I kicked everyone out of the room. And my mom comes in and I said, shut the door. And, she comes over to my bedside and I just grabbed her, Dr. Pamela. And I mean, when I tell you, I held onto that woman for dear life and I just wailed and I just kept saying, my baby, my baby, my baby, mommy, my baby. Oh my God.
Nothing like a mother's love.
And I just, and it took a while. It took a long time to get through that. And I think that, when people say to me, oh, you had a miscarriage, I really don't identify with that because I feel like, and not that it's true, but my feelings are that when I think of most people who have a miscarriage, they can have another child. Whether they choose to or not is one thing, but they can start again. And for me, it was a wrap. It was done. I didn't understand it.
So that was a defining moment in your life.
It was one of the defining moments, because, there was no forward as far as being a vehicle throughout my own body. Right. And then you're going back to work and all these women that you were pregnant with, they all have their babies and you don't have yours. And it was just very sad. And so my sister-in-law, who is, at that time she was 53, she's very much white, and she offered to be our surrogate. And she carried our son Tucker for us. And so 15 years later, I get to be Tucker's mom. And he is beautiful and he's ours. And I didn't get to push him out of my body, but he's still my baby and he's still 100% our DNA. And that was such a beautiful thing that she got to do. But while she was, the way I explained it to him was, daddy's milk and my eggs. And then we baked our cookie dough and put it in Auntie Karen's oven. Yeah. And then a year later, I went and knocked on the door and was like, hi, may I have my cookies, please?
But that still had to be a hard truth to admit to yourself because most women want to carry a child, right? I mean, that had to be really difficult, a difficult space to grow from. Like, how did you grow from that space?
I think that honestly, it was our faith because we still were going to church. We never missed a Wednesday night, a Sunday night. The church that we went to at that time in Pennsylvania was twice on Sunday, Wednesday night kind of church. And at Miles's funeral, 12 people, gave their life over to Christ. And, again, none of this we could see or even allow to really penetrate the goodness of it. But months later, people were coming up to us and saying, we were so encouraged by the fact that you were just coming. And for us, we didn't have a choice. We didn't have a choice because you really you're done. You're at ground zero. There's, because at that time we couldn't afford a traditional surrogate, if I'm being honest, right? We were talking about $500,000 we didn't have that kind of money. So that wasn't happening. We're talking about adoption, but I didn't have the strength or the energy to sit through those classes to only have to foster and then have the child taken out of the home because of what we had been through. I didn't feel like I could emotionally handle it because it would still have been like a loss. And that is not the kind of loss that you would even consider repeating.
Mm-hmm. So you had to pretty much change the trajectory of your life.
I had to change the trajectory of my life, all parts of my life.
How did you shift your mindset in order to manage that?
I think there was a couple of things. The first thing was I remember laying in the hospital bed and I remember reading, it's one of those scriptures that people botch all the time, right? Where they say like, the Lord's never going to give you as much as you can handle. But it was, I think that's like 1 Corinthians 10 or something. I can't remember exactly where it is. But anyway, I just remember thinking and reading that scripture in its entirety. And I was the question came in my spirit. The question that came into my spirit was, would you want somebody else to go through this? In other words, why not you? And as I thought about that, the answer was no. I wouldn't want anybody to go through that. I was like, I'm already in it. it's already happened. So the only way out is through. And so for me to wish that on someone else, like, I don't know, I'm already in the pain. So that was the first thing. The second thing was I kept telling myself that if the Lord loved me enough to give his son to me, he can certainly have mine because he belonged to him anyway.
Yes. Yes.
And so then I would just repeat to myself every day, as many times as it took. I don't know if it was 30, some days it was 100, some days it was only 2. And I would just keep saying over and over again, something good is coming. Something good is coming. Something good is coming. And then when I exhausted that mantra, I just would start, Lord, thank you for the good thing that's coming. Thank you for the goodness that's coming. Thank you for that good thing that's coming. I know that something's good is coming. I trust you. Something good is coming. Yeah. And I just held on to that until something good came.
Yeah.
You know, I really did. And so then the other part of it was that then I had to return to work. And I think that one of the biggest things that came out of it was even the birth of not only my company, but my book and the things that I got to pour into there, especially the section around color, because, you know, I would, you know, like I said, I was there for 16 years. These people were at my wedding. They had been through, my work family was incredible. They had been through a lot of things with me. And, you know, so we're talking about big name designers. You can't go into a Ulta or a Sephora without seeing the name Laura Geller, right? And I remember walking into work one day and I see Laura Geller in the hallway and she just burst into tears and she grabbed me and she wrapped her arms around me and she kept saying, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. And, you know, they didn't know. I go to work, I put on a face and I cry the whole hour ride home. I go into church. Everybody was asking me all these questions, not thinking about how exhausted that was, making me relive it. And I drive 20 minutes home and I cry all the way home, you know? And so I had to learn how to change the narrative. And so I purposely stopped wearing black. I didn't wear black for a long time. I would only wear big, bold, bright colors. And I remember one day I was going into work and we had this busy section that we called the ops desk, operations desk. And the lady that was sitting behind there looked at me and as I was coming around the corner, I see her see me and she has this big smile on her face. And before I could say anything, she just starts smiling. She's like, you look so happy. You always look so happy. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's something to this, right? It was the colors that they couldn't associate that with sadness because I just didn't want to be this sad black girl. I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I didn't want to, you know, and it was hard because people are asked, you know, they just see that I'm back at work, right? And they're just like, how's the baby? How's the baby? Oh my gosh. Oh, you had the baby. Oh my gosh. What did you have? And I'd say, oh, I had a little boy. Like, oh, how is he doing? And then I'd go, oh my gosh, like now I got to tell them, you know, and I felt worse for them than I felt for myself because I knew what was coming, you know?
Yeah.
And then I tell them and then they start crying. And then it was like, then I'm consoling them and telling them it's okay.
Yeah,
and it
when
was
you
just,
really needed to be consoled.
You know, and it was just like, you know, and so after a while, that just was the thing. And so I would hide in corners and cry if I needed to, if it got to be too much, because like I said, I'm pregnant with all these other girls and hearing their stories. And then I had nothing and I had to just sit there and pretend to look at my computer and type or walk into, you know, the closet where we had all the clothes and shoes and take a moment if I needed to. And, you know, and that was just what it was for a while. But it was so easy to talk about, you know, using your wardrobe as a career strategy because that was what I had to learn to do. I had to learn to change the narrative. And that was something I have been doing since I was in high school. So why not now at one of the most devastating moments of my life?
Yeah. So your career. Yeah. Your career helped you to heal.
Yeah, because, you know, I get to get up and do what I love. And I thought that there was not going to be anything harder than that until I lost my mom. and I was like, man, when you think about that, just hit different.
Yeah. Would you say that was the most difficult part of, you're trying to heal from the loss of the baby, and now you have the loss of your mom? Would you say that that was one of the most difficult parts of your healing journey?
No, it wasn't, because they weren't close.
Mm-hmm.
Like by the time my mom had gone, I was already Tucker's mom. She got to spend a lot of time with him. She got to see him and be with him and spend time with him and love him and give him nicknames and all that and all those things. They were really close. She just died 7 years. She died right as I was leaving QVC. And by that time, Tucker was 7, so he had enough time to spend with her. I felt like her and I were just getting started, but we had our time, and she was there when I needed her. Like when Miles died, she was always at my house. Like she was just there in a way that she was never there for me my whole life. But when I needed her in that moment and that season of my life, she was there.
I know when I lost my mom, I was just starting to work on my dissertation, and it had already taken me almost 12 years to complete my doctoral journey. And it was one of the most difficult chapters in my life. And I really did feel like giving up, because I felt like I didn't have the capacity to work on my dissertation and grieve the loss of my mom at the same time.
Yeah.
How did you push through? Because giving up does seem easier sometimes. Can you, share with the listeners, what do you do when giving up seems so much easier, but you know that you can't? I mean, like your Black girl magic, you have to tap into the deepest, most recesses of your ancestral Black girl magic. How did you push through? How do you push through when at times when giving up seems easier?
I have to say that I think you have to decide, which sounds so simple, right? But I think that it's just you against you, in the sense of like, who do you need to become in order to be who you need to be?
Oh, that's good. What I mean? Please say that again. That is good.
Because that's what I try to focus on, right? So if my future self is ahead of me and she's looking back, I can't meet her. I'll never get to meet her if I give up. And so I had to decide at a very young age that was never an option. Like that can't even be in my vocabulary. And I will tell you, recently was the first time that I ever said that out loud, like, about something that had nothing to do with these two situations. I was like, I think I'm just going to quit on my business. I was like, I think I have to just give this up.
Yeah, been there.
But losing my mom, no, I had the kind of mom that she just hit different. Like she was a different kind of mother. So my mom talked about, I don't ever remember a time in my life where my mom was not preparing me for her death. She was the type of mother that said no all the time. And in my years now, right, I can look back, and because she just showed me how to be resourceful, and sometimes to my detriment, but it was just like, what are you going to do when I'm not here?
Yeah.
That was everything. Well, how would you get a ride to work if I wasn't here?
Mm-hmm.
Can you borrow $20 till Friday? No. What would you do if I wasn't here? And so I remember one of the last conversations we had before she passed, I was pulling out of her driveway, and her surgery, she had heart surgery, and she just didn't come home. She never woke up. And I remember like, okay, I'll see you in the morning in the hospital. We were talking about if something happened to her. And I said to her, I'll be okay. And she like walked away, and she walked back to my car, rolled down the window. She looked at me and she said, Toi, you are not going to be okay. And she was right. I wasn't, because it was very different than losing a child, right? I've heard a therapist say once that the hardest thing is losing a child or losing a parent. And I remember like, well, now I've lost both. Like what? And I think that so giving up was never an option. It was a different kind of grief. I didn't cry a lot. I cried a lot for Miles, like just in those moments where I'd be home by myself, like I'd be fine all day. John would go somewhere and I'd be home by myself for the night. And I just would, some years I would be fine. Some years I wouldn't. I walked by his picture and I would collapse on the floor and I'm crying for 45 minutes. With my mom, I would start trembling like an earthquake inside of me because I think I was trying so hard to be okay and to control it that I couldn't think about being okay. I was just so like just trying to make myself feel the feelings. And even if I would cry, it wasn't audible. I would just tremble and tears would sometimes, like it was great. I had never experienced anything like this. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I just couldn't cry like a normal person. It was just like, I was a lot of shaking, like I had a nervous condition. And I remembered that all I wanted to do was like laugh. So I spent a lot of time on Instagram and TikToks and just laughing my way through. Another one of the things that helped me was I read a book called The 13 Things That Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And that really helped me to shape my mindset because my mom has raised me to be mentally strong. And it was okay to be like, I'm not okay. And the way that I guess I kind of justified it in my mind was something really silly. Like, as a woman, we are born with all of the eggs, right, that we're going to have. So I'm like, oh, when my mom was born, I was already with her, and so of course I feel this way because I'm her, like I'm her, I'm a part of her. So part of me is gone. So of course I'm not going to be okay. And I was okay with not being okay, so, yeah.
There is an etiquette to healing from emotional trauma, right? And part of that emotional etiquette is forgiveness. Do you feel like you had to forgive yourself or anyone else while you were going through these traumatic experiences? And if so, how did you do it?
Yeah, I had to forgive my mom. And the way that I got through that was I had to focus on what was left. And I was what was left. I'm her legacy. And then I also had to look at her life and try to understand, like when you start to go through therapy and you start to heal and you're looking at your core values and your core beliefs, I had to then start comparing that, not comparing, that's not the right word, but then I had to lay side by side and look at her life and the decisions that she made and how that her core beliefs and her values trickled down into her parenting and where that could have come from.
That's key. That is so key.
And then I had to show her grace, because there wasn't a lot of expectations for me. I didn't have those kind of parents that, like my parents were never married. And so I have exceptional parents. I had to be okay with saying that, and the fact that, and just again, look for the good. The fact that they were never married meant that I could never be a child of divorce. I never saw them fight or argue. My mom never said an ill word against my dad. He never said an ill word against her. I've never not seen them interact as friends when we did, get together. My dad lived in another state, and he had a whole family and I was a part of his family. And it's still like that. When I see my sisters, we don't use step and half in my family.
Right. We don't.
When I see my sisters, we just pick right back up.
Right.
As if there's never been time apart. And so I had to focus on that and focus on the good. I have an amazing stepmother as well. And, when I went to go visit, they treated me as such. And so I think that I just had to focus on the good and that whole thing about being resourceful, that came out of that time of grief and forgiveness, because when she died, she didn't leave me money. I did not get her life insurance policy. I didn't get anything. And I was feeling some type of way like, well, darn, I've been on my own for so long. And even I was telling my therapist that, like, I was just on this island and she just was like, no, figure it out. Just don't get pregnant, while you're, in high school, whatever. But there was a reason that there were 600 people at her funeral. She was an amazing human. She was the kindest, will give you the shirt off your back, but she wanted different for me. She didn't want me to ever be in a situation where I couldn't take care of myself.
That's a legacy in and of itself.
Yeah, but I had to come to realize that that was what was going on. It wasn't that she didn't like me or she didn't love me. She wanted to give me what she didn't have. And she had me at 20 years old. I can't even imagine. My grandma, I'm like, you got to leave.
That hindsight is 2020. And really people will not understand it until they've lost their mom. Especially if you grow up with anger and resentment, you really don't get those hindsight moments where the reality kicks in that the legacy is, and the lessons of the legacy are much more deeper than you could even imagine. And you couldn't see them, like I can hear my mother's voice when I do things or something happens in my life. I can hear some of those legacy nuggets, those jewels that just drop in my spirit,
Yeah.
So question for you, Toi, if you could speak to the woman you were before this trauma and before your healing, what wisdom would you share with yourself?
I would tell her that she's on the right path, that she's going to be responsible for creating that path and creating that narrative, and that people are going to try to impose their stories onto her, but don't listen. That's not your journey. That's not your journey. It's not right now. And as you move forward, you'll start to see that it was never yours to carry. That you will be so busy tending to your own grass, you can care less if theirs is greener.
You have an incredible story, and I thank you so, so much for sharing it with us. I feel honored to have listened to the transparent way that you have and the vulnerability that you've described your experiences. It's just, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I'm really, I'm holding back my tears. It's just so emotional. I guess the last question that I would have for you would be, based on everything that you've shared with me and the listeners, what legacy do you hope that your story of grace and grind leaves for the people that are listening?
That we are more powerful than we know. We are more powerful than we know. And that every day that you get up and there's breath in your body, you get a chance to stand in that power. That you get to decide and you get to shape the narrative. It's not up to anybody else. It's not up to anybody else. You are so much more powerful than you realize.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We've only just met via email, like a week ago, maybe two, if. And I promise you, when you dropped in my spirit, because I was kind of like grasping at straws, like, okay. And it was just like, call Toi.
I got you.
Today. Yeah. And just thank you for the yes. Thank you for the yes. I mean,
thank you for having me.
Such an incredible story. You are an incredible woman, an incredible sister. Incredible. I have so much respect for you.
Oh.
I know that while you were going through it, it wasn't easy. But when I look at you today and see the woman that you are and who you've become and how you've transformed, that wasn't easy. So testament to your strength and the strength of the legacy of strength that your mother poured into you. So hats off to her.
Oh,
and I'm so sorry for your loss from one sister to another. I completely understand.
But we're their legacy. So we get to do that, and we get to pass that baton on to other people. I have a brother, and I have a little brother. I have a lot of siblings, but my mom only had 2 kids, and my brother and I just like, we're like, my stepdad has passed on 3 years ago, and we're rocking it out. We're like, it's us. We are Joyce's kids.
Well, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you again for being here. And I'm sure the listeners are going to fall in love with you and your remarkable, incredible story. And I just look forward to the comments that I know are going to come. You definitely shared some pearls of wisdom. Like I always say to my graceful grinders and totally uniquers, always remember to have a totally unique day on purpose. And we're out until next time.